Thank you very much. And Ray and for doing that. Also, that was a real. We move on to the next item, and I have very carefully and very deliberately avoided any mention of the word finance and budget. Deliberately so, if I didn't want to overshadow what we've just heard. But that is the substantive item for today, the budget 26-27, and the medium-term financial framework 27 into 2030-31. Before I deal with the administrative parts of this and we move on to the report, I do want to make a brief statement. In the interest of transparency, I would make members aware that I did receive on time and in order a proposal from Mohammed seeking to alter recommendations in the paper today, specifically with references around the position with respect to reserves. I have used my discretion understanding Order 23.2 and was minded not to accept the amendment, as it did not, there was no materially substantive difference from the recommendations. However, I do want to explain my rationale because it is important, such an important issue. As chair, I have a responsibility to ensure that this meeting runs orderly and smoothly, but I also have an additional obligation, which is also largely self-imposed upon myself, to ensure that I give all members the opportunity to have a fair say, to express their opinions, and that I do not unduly stifle input. It is, of course, not for me to determine the contributions of members, but everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions and to contribute as they wish in a short time. And I would remind you that you're more than welcome to come in more than once if you so wish. And whereas it's not for me to determine what people say or don't say, you will have inferred from what you've heard the approach that you may wish to take when it comes to questioning on the report. And I will leave that statement there. I'd like to.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I respect your decision as understanding Order 23. However, I have a serious concern. My amendment has already been deemed competent by officers. And I think it is important that we respect that professionalism judgment and not to accept my amendment. I think you have shown disrespect to officers. And although you have spoken just now and giving us opportunity, but I totally disagree with your statement in relation to transparency and accountability. And I think this board is a democratic body, and member must be able to bring forward amendments for debate, scrutiny, and discussion. And preventing that from happening raises serious concern about transparency and accountability. I have given various reasons. Last time I was told that my amendment, I have actually submitted 2 amendments and I missed the deadline, and 1 amendment was taken, another no, for the vulnerability of staff, can't take it. I think this is not a democratic system, and seriously you should consider your decision and accept my amendment, because I have raised so many times this question about accountability and transparency. Question is not just that you're going to ask question and answer. No, bring debate in this committee meeting like other committees, and stopping debate, I don't think it is democracy. And then I have 1 question to Officer Avila.
Please, by all means, put your questions.
Can you please confirm to me that my amendment is competent and you have changed only 1 word in my whole amendment, where I have put lead officer and you have amended chief finance officer? My amendment is competent.
Yes, Chair, thank you. In terms of the proposal that you put forward in terms of its wording was competent. Standing Order 23.3 says that a proposal has to be substantially different in order for it to be accepted, so the decision rests with the chair.
Thank you very much for clarity. You did not highlight to me that there need to be some kind of differentiation, and definitely my amendment is not similar to a recommendation. And why you did not actually indicate to me? Officers, is
Go, I will officers to answer if they so wish, but I believe they've already intimated their rationale, but if there is anything that Jess wishes to ask.
No, nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think it's always helpful to hear thinking behind it. I have considered my decision, and I will refer members to the comments that I just made, and also to the standing orders, which are publicly available for anyone to view. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Jonathan Belford and his team for the power of work that's gone into the budget of the medium-term financial framework. I'm sure Jonathan is wishing for his next holiday, and I don't blame him for that, having come very shortly on the heels of the local authority budget setting as well. Today, the Integration Joint Board sets its budget for the financial year 2026-2027. This outlines our spending priorities and aligns with the strategic priorities that we approved in our strategic plan last July, which I would commend to anyone. It is very readable. It sets in stone our commitment to working towards our prevention agenda, to transforming the way in which we deliver services, and also to putting ourselves on a sustainable footing for the challenges likely to come in future. Papers that we see before us today are the product of many months of work. Indeed, I would argue that we never stopped working on this, even when we approved the last budget in 2025. I would like to thank the 961 thereabouts people who took the time to respond to the public consultation that we ran from November through to December. Your feedback allowed us to streamline our decisions, to ensure that we are doing the very best that we can for the people that we support. The feedback highlighted the public's priorities, the services which they value most, and where we should be focusing our energy. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our staff across the Social Care and Health Partnership, and also portfolio and directorate leads for the work that they have done on the individual budgets, and also for the engagement that we've had with members of the IJB across multiple sessions to ensure that we can be fully cited on not only decisions that we take today, but the rationale and the evidence and the data behind them is what I'd like to take into. And draw your attention to the report on pages 7 through 24. There are an additional 8 appendices taking us through to page 252. In addition, and for by way of guidance for anyone using the alternative format and accessible versions of the papers you may wish to have to hand, the standalone spreadsheets, which are copies of the financial tables included in the report. And I would now invite Jonathan to make any introductory comments that he may wish. I would note that there are changes between the format of the papers that we've seen in previous years. Jonathan may wish to address these to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I think I'll start by also saying thank you. Thank you to the team. As you've already mentioned, Chair, this report comes before you not because I've contributed to it, but because the team has been working on this all year round. And you referenced the consultation that was done. So clearly the effort that's been put in is not over a short period of time. It's something that accumulates into something that hopefully comes together in a way that allows us to approve a balanced budget for the year ahead, but also looks forward with the presentation of the medium-term financial framework for the year ahead, plus 4 further years to 2030, 31. I can't actually quite believe that I'm saying we're into the 30s. but there we are. So my appreciation goes to the team who've worked across the Health and Social Care Partnership, across the whole system in terms of the way in which savings options, but also an understanding of our current environment as it looks, as it's been portrayed in our 25-26 financial position. And without that, as I say, there isn't a report to bring before you. So I appreciate everything that has gone into that. And no doubt there will be questions on some of the appendices, which are lengthy, to say the least. In terms of the budget, again, as you've said, this introduces a balanced budget for the IJB for financial year 26-27. That's to say it's balanced in front of us today, but it doesn't come without any risk. But the ambition remains to deliver a balanced position for 26-27, sorry, without further and additional funding being provided by the individual partners. As I say, it comes with risk, and some of those are expressed within the report itself. I've approached this report slightly differently. It combines, and I think it helps to combine not only where we are today, where we're going in the very short term, i.e. next year, but actually combines with that medium term look forward to see what's ahead of us, and combines the whole thing together. So I've presented hopefully assurance around where we are in 25-26, which builds on the reports you've already received during this financial year. It provides a balanced position for 26-27 for presenting that new medium-term financial framework with the IJB going forward. And while that balanced position, I think, can be provided and presented for 26-27, the position of financial challenge does not go with does not get removed and remains going forward. You see that in the table that I've presented as part of the framework. This gap, if we can achieve what we want to in 26-27, will reduce. The expectation is that funding will continue to be flowing through both partners, from NHS Grampian and from Aberdeen City Council, in recognition of the rising costs that we will face, and that provided those things continue and that the quantum continues to be the right amount, then hopefully the gap between our rising costs and our income levels will continue to be at a smaller level than we've seen for the last 2 years. The report, Chair, seeks approval for the 26-27 budget, and also provides directions to both partners in terms of what we're asking them to go away and do as part of the partnership. I also seek approval for the medium-term financial framework, which positions us in a place that recognises, I think, the challenges that are ahead of us, but also says in order to be more robust and resilient, then we need to do things like start to return ourselves to having reserves, build reserves over a period of time. What I can say is that won't be achieved in one single year. It's something that needs to be worked on over a period of time. But I think it's something that we definitely need to work towards. I think to provide not only the resilience of managing risk, but also potentially giving the opportunity to invest in services to transform and to allow the cost of that transformation to be paid for in a more managed way. I'll leave it there, Chair, in terms of the presentation of the report. I'm happy to take questions, and hopefully my colleagues will join me in trying to answer some of those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I think just for me, by way of just to kick us off, you obviously mentioned there the process to rebuild our reserves. You mentioned there the additional work that we need to do when it comes to finding balance. And it's probably worth recalling that the IJBs across Scotland are in a similar financial position, that we are in no way an outlier in that regard. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yes, I think what we're seeing, there was a report from Audit Scotland, the most recent one was published just last month, reflecting on the position where IJBs had got to financially for following financial year 24-25, so last year. But their reflections are that, and I suppose the evidence they've gathered is that almost half of IJBs now have no contingency reserves, is the way they've approached it. There's money for specific things, and we're in that position. But having that contingency, that uncommitted balance, is something that many IJBs are now facing. And clearly we'd like to reverse that. I would also add, from my own experience, that in 25-26, I think a number of IJBs will also be consuming any remaining reserves that they perhaps have. So it's a constantly changing landscape, but one that is reflective of the demand, the increased costs that we've all experienced, and the fragility of money that once it's used, it's gone.
Thanks for putting that on the record. I think that's really helpful overall context. Any questions, comments? To Richie first.
Yeah. Thanks for saying. A few comments first, and then I'll be settling three questions for just now, at least. So firstly, in terms of comments, yeah, really appreciate the work that's gone into the paper, and again endorse the recognition of that. There's a ton of depth in there, a ton of work around it, and I particularly like that flow through into future years as well. That's a medium-term planning is incredibly important, so I appreciate that, and more work to come in that. And like you said, Hussein, as well, I do really like the intent to move towards rebuilding the reserve. I think that's a really important point. And whether that's for extra investment in preventative activity or change processes or transformation, I think that principle is really important. And even just stating that, accepting the challenge of still maintaining that balanced budget for this year, this coming year, stating that in a formal report like this, I think is a great sign of intent. So really support that. In terms of managing the process, again, the role of the Budget Savings Oversight Group is set out, and that's also incredibly important just in terms of that diligence. I know we haven't quite reached the end of this financial year yet, but the outturn is a positive one based on where we started, and that's partly down to some of that extra diligence around about that regular budget management and that culture, I guess, that sits around that. So that the role of that group continues to be really important, and I guess just the strategic intent that we set out as well. So there's clearly much more than just about money. Ultimately, it is about services, and that again is so important in terms of how we go about our business. So with those comments, I'm going to turn my first question, and again, if you bear with me, Hussein, there's three, but I'll just maybe focus on the first one just now, and it is in that point that you and Jonathan just talked through a minute ago. And if I call it whether it's contingency funding or budget deficit support, however you term it, I think from my reading of the paper, my understanding is that our partners, in essence, our budget doesn't require any additional funding support from either the City Council or NHS Grampian, which again, from our position in terms of sustainability, is really, really good and really important. However, I do recognise the risks are set out in the paper, and I guess it's just that I'd like just to test, I guess, the realism of that. And if both partners have gone for the upside scenario that's set out in the report, I understand that, but I guess I'd like a bit of assurance around the realism around aiming for the budget we've pitched at, and recognising that I think other IGBs in the North East have planned for some additional funding support from the respective partners, but we haven't. So I guess I'm just wanting to test out that we're not creating an undue risk, if you like, in terms of our ambitions to balance the books. Just to reiterate, I do welcome that we need to balance the books. That's really important, but I guess I'm just looking for assurance that we can deliver on it as much as we reasonably can. So any comments on that initially would be helpful.
Thanks, Chair. And in reply, I think you mentioned there, Richie, that the partners had chosen kind of the upside position. I suppose what we've done is try to present that in a way to recognise that risk. The choices that Aberdeen City Council have made is to recognise the central scenario and have set aside as part of the council budget a £2 million contingency effectively in case of financial distress during the year. And my understanding from the Director of Finance at NHS Grampian is their planning arrangements and the work that they're doing in the Scottish Government about managing that position includes, I'll say, a similar type of contingency arrangement, whereby they would have the flexibility to manage, let's say, that £5 million overspend position on a shared basis. So £2 million coming from the council, £3 million from NHS Grampian. So from that point of view, I think both partners have approached it differently from the current financial year, but actually responsibly in terms of recognising the risks that we've got. And I think I did I say breathe a little easier knowing that both have got that. Not because I doubt the effort and I suppose the work that will go into delivering on 26-27 budget, but more about just the unknowns, the unknown and unplanned for elements that are always a feature of our budgets. So from that point of view, I totally recognise the risk profile. I hope we don't need to draw on those elements, but we are in a position where we've got a full year of savings to be delivered. We've got a number of different factors, that some of which we know about and some that we don't yet know about. So having that knowledge in the back of our minds that both partners are actually prepared is something that I think the IJB should welcome. Thanks, Jim.
Richie?
And yeah, thanks very much, Jonathan. And yeah, so that gives me a fair bit of assurance, to be fair. We've gone from a £10 million plus additional funding for this year to a £5 million contingency for next year. And while I guess we're setting that ambitious, but I think right budget in terms of hopefully balancing our books. But no, that's really helpful. Thank you. The second question is on just the business of recurring savings, and for the year ahead, the savings that are set out, just a query as to how much of those will be recurring savings rather than one-off.
I think the short answer, Chair, is that everything that's been proposed is recurring in nature for 26-27. And undoubtedly, as I say, things will change, and there might be opportunities to take one-off savings from particular circumstances. But I think what's been presented ultimately is a range of recurring savings that we would be looking to rely on into future years.
Yeah, I'd partly assumed that, but it's just I wanted just to be sure of that. So again, that's incredibly useful. So in terms of that sustainability and confidence and forward planning, that's really important. The final question I'll pose just now is around the proposed contract reviews, service reviews, and there's some substantial numbers in there in terms of anticipated savings for the coming year, and it's, I guess, just a bit more assurance or reassurance around the likely impact of whether these will be full year savings or will they be in year, and does that immediately put us under a bit of pressure, I guess, in terms of balancing our books for the coming year. So it's really just about that the reviews that will be underway, and I know some of them are well advanced, in fairness, but the extent to which they've been assumed to be full year, and is that realistic for the year ahead?
I think, Chair, I'm happy to maybe start. I don't know if others will want to join in, but I see it as being a mixture. Some will start at the beginning of the year, and others will be implemented with an effective date sometime during the financial year. What we don't have is the full year effect of all the changes that we're making at the moment. So that full year knock-on effect, while I've made the assumption within the papers that the £1 million or the 1.1 million that we're forecasting will give us an opportunity to save going forward. I remain hopeful that there's also a degree of latitude in that, in the positive way, in that actually we might, by the time we close off the books, that there might actually be an underlying further saving that will perhaps compensate for that element, and that's what I've just been a little. I wasn't trying to be too generous or optimistic. I was trying to be prudent, I suppose, in what I've done. So there are pluses and minuses in that, but I genuinely, I would say that the way in which the savings for this year are being delivered, they're delivered over the course of the year. Therefore, there's part year effects. And for 26-27, I'm very clear that there will be savings at the start of the year, but there will also be savings during the year. I'll be touching on that as part of our quarterly reports in terms of the performance in year.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Suzanne.
Okay, I'll go to Martin, then I'll come to Mark, and we'll take anything else in mind.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, I think it's appropriate to express very sincere thanks to everyone involved over the past financial year in working so hard to achieve and indeed to some degree exceed our economic targets. Our latest quarterly reports have indicated modest surpluses, but it does demonstrate that there's been a real concentrated effort of teamwork of everyone involved, and mindful that so many other IJVs are experiencing similar enormous pressures. I think it is particularly reassuring, very comforting that we have such a dedicated, high quality professional team locally, delivering services to our fellow citizens in health and social care all through the year. So that stability, I think, is particularly reassuring. And everyone has obviously taken that challenge of ensuring financial sustainability very, very seriously. We've got some serious challenges presented to us in the document. Difficult decisions, but I think they are the right decisions that we're looking at. They are choices that we wouldn't necessarily want to make, but they will provide us with long-term stability and financial sustainability. I wanted to ask about that central scenario risk. Given that throughout the report there's mention of quite significant volatility, price rises in primary care, prescribing seems to be a recurring concern. Contracts, as was mentioned, commissioning contracts that have appeared unexpectedly, extra staff costs and pressures, and so those are, for example, two areas where there are particular significant proportionate pressures. So what's the likelihood, I suppose is what I'm asking, of that central scenario being the most realistic one? I think that it's good that we've got the delivery, we've got the business plan, we've got a very clear strategy, but it does make life more precarious when we've got that uncertainty. So is it possible to have some more detail on how we're going to tackle potential further risks arising if the central scenario does not transpire?
Chair, that's quite a question. I think, so where did the scenarios come from? I suppose they came from looking back at where we've been. They've come from what is reasonable in a budget that's let's say £500 million all in. There's a reasonableness by which we should expect pluses and minuses as we go through the year. There's an understanding and history and experience of this year in terms of what additional funding we were requiring in order to try and manage that risk and the best effect. And there's discussion, I suppose, across the council and NHS Grampian around what would be reasonable in terms of the way in which we should support the IJB, or perhaps how volatile that overall position might look. On the positive side, while that in itself does not result in a precise number, but with a look at the positives that are coming out of this year, with an understanding of the funding that has been confirmed by both partners at this point, and I suppose with some certainties that we didn't have this time last year, like the pay award. The pay award is known for 26-27. We know both from the council point of view, but also from an NHS Grampian point of view, with protection, I would say, from an NHS perspective, that if there was a reopening of the NHS deal, which I think is part of the arrangements, then it would be funded by a Scottish government. So there are some certainties there that perhaps take you away from going, how extreme could this be, and bring you back to some sense of actually what's normal, or perhaps what's reasonable in terms of recognising the cost exposure that we might have. At the end of the day, I could come up with scenarios that present us with really, really challenging financial positions. I'm not sure that does anybody any good, because either we get fixated on having to seek and secure that funding from both partners, for the funding to then be made available, and actually for people to relax. And I'm not suggesting that anybody's relaxed in this room or in the teams at all. But I mean, I think what we need is an understanding that there are limits. Finance is finite, and our partners in putting money into the IJB have confirmed how much money we're allowed to spend. Combined, as I say, it's heading towards £500 million. The scenario of perhaps 1% being out seems reasonable in my mind, based on all of the things that I've tried to take into account and have discussed with NHS Grampian's Director of Finance also. So that helps.
Well, yeah, thanks very much for that. I think that there is very clear attitude of accepting the challenge amongst the professional teams, and I think that that's reflected in the delivery plan, where we're seeing some strong evidence of innovative thinking coming forward. I think people are recognising that we do have to be more agile, and more aware of the benefits and the possibility of service redesign. So I think that in the long term, we will be in an even better position as we move forward. Yeah, it's going to be very, very volatile, but you know, there are great opportunities ahead. For example, technology-enabled care, and many other ideas. So it's down to that creativity of everyone who's involved that will help us to have that long-term, sustained, positive journey. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. Mark and then Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to associate myself with comments of Martin and Richie with regards to the amount of work that's gone into the budget. So thank you very much. A couple of comments and then one question. I certainly will surprise you with my questions, funnily enough. The comments would be about the strategic plan and making sure that we remain focused in our transformation work when we get to the year 3 of the strategic plan, because I know that we're concentrating on our finance at the moment. We must not lose sight of the transformation work, otherwise we will just end up having this repeat conversation with ourselves in a couple of years. So I expect to reiterate that point. I think, as I say, the other question will always be, and Caroline to answer some potential, Chair, is around prescribing costs. Okay, yet again, we see a 9% increase in prescribing costs, and John smiles because he knows this is my hobby horse, but it is a huge aspect of our budget, one of the drivers. I think if you look at what is occurring within the world today, those changes that can happen at the drop of a hat, or the energy costs or any other aspects of cost of inflation, I think we have to take that absolutely into context here. I'm more assured by the fact that our partners will be able to have some contingencies, but I do think the focus should stay on that savings plan that we've achieved and have achieved very well last year. I think we should be commended for achieving that as well within the IJB. So more comments than anything else, and say the prescribing will be our question, Chair. Thank you.
I will go to Caroline if she wishes to do that.
Thank you. It's, yeah, so I mean, I guess what I want to say is that we're talking about thanking lots of people, and I think there's already been a lot of evidence in the last year that our teams have done an amazing job already this year, making a number of cost savings, not just, well, huge numbers of cost savings actually. And there are down payments, this management team who spend hours looking at data, looking at trends from other boards, and probably look to try and predict essentially that's what we might see going forward. We know that we've got patients who are living longer. They're living longer partly because they're on medication, and that of course provides a cost system benefit. And so we keep people in the community, which is where we want them to. And we do that by using some drugs. I mean, anecdotally, I was told there's a handful of drugs that if we see the trends that we're seeing elsewhere and coming to Grampian, they will be expensive, but they will cross system make a huge benefit. So people will come out of hospital. The one that most people will know about is your weight loss injections, for example. They'll understand that. And there's some other ones that I don't need to go into detail of, but you know, the potential of those drugs is much wider than in the community. These are things that are our control, which benefits in the cost of these medications. But yeah, I can reassure you that there's a lot of work going on, and it has already gone on in terms of making switches, even to speaking with the patients, asking for their permission, and actually patients are on the whole very happy if you're honest with them and explain that this is the benefit of everybody, and to make switches that are actually accepted. To also get the care that they get.
Gosh. So to come to you, John, was there anything that you wanted to add in Mark's point?
No, Chair.
I'm going to Mohammed, and then I'll come to anybody else.
Thank you very much, Chair, and can I thank Mr. Bedford and his team for their hard work. Two questions. If the 10.9 million was one-off funding, why was there no robust long-term plan to prevent this cliff edge situation? What specific safeguards are now in place to avoid the IJB again reaching a position of zero reserves next year, although you highlighted that we have to build our reserves?
Chair, I would say that the ambition has always been to work with the funding that the partners were able to provide on a recurring basis. The medium-term financial framework last July, as presented by my predecessor, recognised that funding and the sustainability of that funding from partners going forward was not a long-term possibility, really, and therefore 26-27 was going to remain a challenging, particularly challenging financial year, as 25-26 provided the foundations for moving us back to balance, and 26-27 then takes it to the next stage. If during the course of those 2 years, this one and the one ahead, if we can achieve more over that, then I would like to think that we start to get back to a point where we can potentially drip feed some funding into reserves in order to help the IJ be more resilient, perhaps to allow partners not themselves to relax, but be in a position where they understand that there's two levels or two layers, dare I say, of safety net. that exists, and to allow the IJB to start to feel like it has decisions it can make, to not only spend money, but also how it directs that transformation piece that's already been stated. So I don't think that last year we were in a position where it was for a cliff edge. I think there was a managed process that was being presented through the reports. What we do recognise, though, is there's a huge amount in order to actually get us back from the place that we were, which was spending considerably more than both partners could provide on an ongoing basis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Belford. How can the IGB board operate safely with no financial reserves for a second consecutive year? What is the contingency plan if demand increases or saving targets are not met? Are we not vulnerable?
Chair, we definitely are vulnerable. I won't deny that. Are we in the best place? I think we're moving towards that rather than being in that place. There's no doubt the risks are definitely there. In terms of we could experience that that financial shock or that financial unplanned and unexpected set of financial circumstances, which is why I suppose in presenting to both the NHS board through their papers, but Aberdeen City Council and through their papers, this understanding of risk was something that we were keen to make sure it was understood by the partners. And while the IJB absolutely, it should be delivering planning in the future, I would be expecting next year, for example, following the medium-term financial framework, be expecting us to be saying there's I think, is it almost £5 million of a gap? If I don't have it in front of me, I'm in the wrong page. But if that's £5 million, I'd be expecting us to go a little bit further in order to start to build that reserve. So that's where that comes from. Does it mean that we run a risk for just now? Yeah, absolutely. Are our partners, as I said in the introduction, I was at pains to make sure that the partners understood what could happen and the fact that we don't have that financial resilience, which of course would be ideal. But the intention for the IJB, if we can follow the proposals that are here, then will hopefully move us back to a point where we are in that position. And we don't have that inbuilt risk of we've got nothing to fall back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Belford, and to yourself, Chair. How confident we are that 14.5 million in saving is realistic and deliverable within 1 year? And what proportion of the saving will directly impact frontline services?
I think I can only go back to my comments about, I think there's a mixture of deliverability. So some of the savings we're already preparing for are there, and we can see where those savings are going to come out. And those are being captured from the beginning of the financial year. While I think some of the ones such as the contract reviews and so on, they're going to continue right through the year, which is what we're currently in that position in terms of delivering on 25-26 financial year. There's obviously a risk that those two things don't line up and 14.5 is not achieved. But that's not to say that there aren't other things that we can bring to bear. I think the 14.5 is described in more detail than I've ever seen through an IJB paper in terms of the way in which we propose to deliver on savings. They've also been consulted on already in terms of the progress and preparation for actually what changes are going to be made. So from that perspective, we're in a very good place to actually allow us to move on and following the decisions today. Will it turn out perfectly 14.5? I will not sit here and tell the IGB members that 14.5 will be delivered precisely as it is written. I don't expect that, and I don't expect that probably from any budget. But what we will be doing is we'll be monitoring that carefully throughout the year and reporting back as the year progresses. And hopefully we'll see that if there are adverse variances, things not going our way, then we'll find means to put them right and find ways to make them go our way. Because if I remind the board chair that the first point of call under the integration scheme is for us to put in place a recovery plan. So I think we're already in that recovery plan position. So the budget is a recovery plan in itself. We will continue to monitor that and we'll bring back what the recovery of any underachievement is in the future. And I think until we're in a position where those reserves can be replaced, where we can actually start to work with both sides of we've got a budget gap, we've got resources, how do we manage risk and so on, then we have to live with, I suppose, some of the challenges that surround us at this moment in time because of our financial position.
Thank you very much, Chair. You regard my last question, Mr. Belford. So why is the IGB being asked to approve a budget before NHS Grampian confirms its final position? What happens if the NHS contribution differs significantly? Will this trigger cut mid-year?
So, Chair, I would say this is normal practice just because of the timing of when NHS Grampian Board meets. We have an obligation under the legislation to set a balanced budget and to recognise how that's going to be funded, obviously. The timing on the back of NHS having received their funding plans from Scottish Government, on the back of Aberdeen City Council having made decisions on its budget, allow us to firm up what we believe and understand is going to be the situation, more certainly from Aberdeen City Council's point of view, but I only mention within the recommendations about NHS board decisions. Those are, I'll say, are unlikely. I would be very surprised if that were going to be the case, given the amount of conversation that we've had about the money to be passported through to the IJB. There's a clear understanding of what the expectations are for all three IJBs within NHS Grampian. And from that point of view, I would be saying that while I've written it, I don't expect it. Should there be a change, and should NHS Grampian, for whatever reason, decide that they cannot passport that funding through to the IJB, then I think I've said that we need an urgent meeting, not a mid-year one, an early in April meeting, in order to get us to understand the circumstances. But I do believe that's lower risk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. John, please.
Thanks, Hussein. Yeah, number of comments really, rather than, well, there's a question in there somewhere, but it's mainly comments. I'll take it, Mark. Your hobby horse is a perfectly legitimate hobby horse to have, and I think there are people in other RJBs right across Scotland who have the same hobby horse. That said, I'm kind of with Caroline looking at the whole system. I think I look at paragraph 4.2 of the report, which tells us that we've got assurance that the RJB is taking control of expenditure. Certainly I've been involved with the RJB since 2017. And I think this has been the most robust process we've gone through because of a lot of the workshops that we've had. I thought the paper we've got today is one of the best that we've had. I really appreciate the sensitivity analysis, particularly the fact that it's got sources quoted. Beaten into me as an undergraduate that you quote your sources and put some footnotes into. That's good. In terms of the national context, there is a network for all the chairs and vice chairs of all the RJBs across Scotland. We said one of the meetings last Thursday. When we also had some of the chief financial officers there, and I think pretty much everybody's in the same boat. If you look at the drivers of change, if you look at the drivers of cost, not least demographics, everybody's facing exactly the same challenges. A number of the RJBs that have got a few reserves left are dipping into those, and a number of them are asking their partners for additional contributions. So yeah, pretty much all in the same boat. The another comment I would make in terms of in one of the appendices, we talk about exiting Forester Hill. It's very, very clear in the paper that we're talking just about speech therapy and podiatry. There are two GP practices there. We've got the Westbourne practice, the Elmbank practice, and so I want to assure anyone who just looks at the headline that those practices are not moving from that location. And what else? Oh yeah, I'll come to the bit where I've got actually got a question rather than a comment. The reduction in telephony, I think it's good that we're not cutting back on emergency telephony, and it's good that we've not gone for a digital only solution, because there are people out there who don't do digital. I was just wondering whether we might be reviewing that. I suppose it's kind of one of those things, you know, where you're kind of hanging on the telephone and someone is saying your call is important to us, you're number 9,000 in the queue, please continue to hold. I just wondered if we could, whether we might be reviewing that.
Amanda, I've seen your hand, so I'll come to you next, but go on.
Chair, I'm not sure I can answer the detail about telephony, if I'm honest. I'll give a go at most subjects, but maybe Sandy can help us.
Thank you, John. I think what we're thinking about is we're not stopping people phoning or being answered the phone. Probably looking at the amount of time in a day that the phone is actually answered. That would probably be one thing. So, for example, in the health village it was set up from 7:30. The phones were answered to 5:30. That's too long a day now, and we're not able to do that. And we are still, for example, currently in Sexual Health Service, we're having to cover, switch the phones off to cover breaks, as opposed to the phones are being switched off all day. We are dependent, obviously, on an NHS Scotland no redundancy policy. We are dependent on where vacancies arise. But the kind of thing I'm thinking about, John, might be a building that may have several receptions. If one of those people left, then we're more likely to say we don't need to fill that post. So we're not moving immediately to a digital solution. That would require a much bigger scope of investment, but probably more about the length of time. And some of that relates to our own experience when we phone the bank, when we phone Scottish Gas, when we phone Sky TV, or we phone anybody else. There's an element of when you have to phone and when you can expect to be phone to be answered. That trying to get a sense of the context, John.
Yeah, that's reassuring. In fact, I phoned at maybe dental appointment the other day, and I phoned at lunchtime, and they said we closed for lunch. Please phone back later, and that was fine. So, but yeah, banks, insurance companies, Scottish Gas, there was the ones that know anything.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Sandy. Amanda, please.
Hi, yeah, first of all, I'd just like to say that obviously congratulations for the way that the report has been written. It was easy. I did still find it hard going, but I did manage to understand it, which was really good. I agree with John about the phones. You know, obviously, I realise that obviously it has to be cut, but for the disabled people and people that sort of, you know, are not as good at digital, you know, doing it on the website, there needs to be a phone, and of course people need human contact. And I was just going to comment a wee bit on the obviously the staff cuts for the physiotherapy and what have you. It's sad that that's got to happen, but I understand why. But I would say that obviously it's going to create a risk to the staff, obviously, because they're going to have to work harder, and also for the patients, because they're going to have longer waiting times. But I do kind of understand, but you know, I'm not, you know, SAT.
There's a point there around staff and health and well-being, and I will come to Sandy.
Sure, let's go ahead.
Sorry, Stephen, can I
Sorry.
start with you? So I think Lizzie will start with the HP one and then I'd like to say something after.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Finland, the Archibald Allied Health Professions Lead, who oversees the physiotherapy and occupational therapy and various HP services. Thank you for your comment. I appreciate that. And you will have seen in the IIA, you already have all the dates, but just to reassure you that people, when they need to be seen, they'll still be vetted and triaged and will be to be seen where it's needed. And you know, I think it is in the context of more rates for more services. And hopefully the IIA demonstrates the controls we have to manage that.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you everyone for your questions and Jonathan and the team for the hard work to get this. I'd like to say I think we have come a long way in last year where we've got to from a financial aspect. And Councillor Malik's point is very valid about the reserves. It's something that I, as the Chief Officer, am very keen that we get to a position that we will have some reserves so we can do some of that real transformation that we want, and we want that buffer there as well. I think the team are very committed. These are very much a team effort. The proposals that are put forward you today, this is not something I have come up with Jonathan. It's absolutely been with the team completely involved. We have confidence in our delivery because it is difficult. We have worked really hard in the last year to get us to a position where we have. And I think next year we're all very aware of the challenge we're going to have to deliver. But I think we are very committed with us and our wider teams on that opportunity for transformation and what we need to do different with our services to ensure we're getting the best value for the money that we have allocated to us. And I think the last year has been really about driving efficiencies, and I think we're in a much different place than where we were, continuing to do that and welcome the challenge ahead. And how we will keep you updated on how we're progressing the delivery of that, along with Jonathan and the team. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aaron. And I'd just say thank you for your comment on the readability of the papers there. I think it's helpful to have that from your perspective also. It's fair to say I've challenged officers to make our papers readable and understandable to as broad institutes as possible. And I think they have risen to that challenge. And I think the additional narrative that we have has certainly been helpful, but it's really appreciate your making sure that is working as we expect it to be working. Are there any other questions? I have just one question open to whoever wishes to answer this, and that's on the public consultation. This is the second year we've been out to the public and we've asked them for their feedback, and public have come back and we've taken their feedback on board, for example, around unpaid carers, also around eligibility criteria for services. I think it's always good practice that we've done something good, but looking to the future, I'm just wondering if anybody had any comment on lessons learned from this consultation exercise. Is there anything that we would look to carry forward to the next time we do this?
They don't think it's smart on here. Personally, the consultation engagement process was successful as Mr. Mellon was outlined in terms of the responses received. We have done a lesson learned in the process in the local working group, consultation engagement group. There's a couple of members here for this and that. I think to help me out in terms of the sort of things we want to do in the future. But we've done that in lesson learned, and that's what we're doing for the lesson learned with the senior leadership team as well, and we're doing a lesson learned at the budget savings oversight group as well. So we'll be collating that and looking forward to seeing what can we do differently in next year and the year after. We're also really keen in making sure that we communicate the outcomes of the budget once approved, making sure that people are aware of what's been agreed today and the reasons why. Grace, if you want to
just to thank everybody for their support round about the budget consultation. We had the 951 responses, and compare that to the previous year, it's a huge increase. And we've kind of got to thank our council colleagues for that, because we worked alongside them and we were both doing our budget consultation processes, and I think that that's really helped. I think there will be some lessons learned to go through forward next year, and we're kind of starting a wee bit earlier and kind of getting some more information out there. But I think again, it will be a different year for us, and how we're kind of going to be consulting with our citizens out in Aberdeen. So it'll be good to see what response we get next. And I think that that will probably have the transformation aspect to it. So just thank you again to all staff.
If we're all content, we will move to the recommendations. There are 9 recommendations for this paper, and given the scope of the recommendations and the importance of this, I intend to ask you to approve each recommendation individually. However, I will simply ask, if you don't agree, then please indicate at that point. Otherwise, I will just have to approve recommendations. Oh, sorry, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Chair. And because you did not take my amendment for accountability and for a debate, I would disagree with the recommendation and I dissent from the decision. Thank you. Can my dissent be recorded in the minute? Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, just pause briefly between each.
Recommendations on page 8. It's recommended that the Integration Joint Board 1 notes that partners have provided commitments to funding of £10.99 million, NHS Grampian 6.7 million, Aberdeen City Council 2 million, off basis in 2025-26. Therefore, this funding is being removed for 2026-27. 2. Note that IGB has requested that partners remain cautious of the demand and cost increases that exist in the wide range of IGB services, that they prepare for the worst by allocating contingency funding to provide financial support 2026-27 based on the central scenarios detailed at paragraph 4.8. While the IGB itself plans for a prudent and responsible balanced budget position 2026-27 without the use of additional funding. Note Aberdeen City Council agreed its general fund budget for 2026-27 March 2026 interest of £6.152 million. NHS Grampian Health Board meets to agree their 2026-27 budget 19th of March 2026. This will include consideration of a gross interest increase pay and non-pay elements, commitment to additional funding for GP contracts, support relevant specific grant and living example of gross partnership funding confirmed by Scottish Government. I approve the proposed revenue budget for the 2026-27 financial year as presented at paragraph 429, subject to changes required by any decisions arising from the NHS Grampian Health Board meeting 19th of March 2026. 6. Approve, note and endorse the savings proposed of 2.5 2026-27 within the take the directions as Appendix B to NHS Grampian, Appendix B to Aberdeen City Council, instructs the Chief Officer to issue the directions. Grampian. 8. Note that should the funds to be passed to the IGB not be approved by NHS Grampian Health Board, the meeting to reconsider budgets. And approve the medium-term financial framework 2026-27, 2030-31 as shown.
I'm not hearing any dissent. Can I just confirm we're happy to agree with all block?
Agree.
Thank you very much. I'm skipping forward to item 6.1, which is the date of the next meeting. And the LGB will next meet on Tuesday, the 12th of May. Can I take this opportunity before I draw the public session to a close to thank everybody for their interest in today's meetings? Has been an important meeting in setting the direction of travel for the year to come. I'm grateful once again for everybody who has engaged in the process. And as you've heard, that has been incredibly valuable to all of our staff and our GB members. I'd like to thank all of our officers, Jonathan and his team, Emma, all our other support staff for their help in today's meeting, which is very much appreciated. It is 11:22, and I will draw the public phase of the meeting to a close. We'll just pause for a few seconds to allow the recording to end. Thank you.